Welcome to the Private Equity Exchange 2007, the only summit bridging the gaps between limited partners, private equity funds, corporate executives, and entrepreneurs. The Private Equity Exchange is the only venue where LPs, private equity firms, corporate executives, and entrepreneurs meet, enabling them to move quickly from ideas to deal crafting. The Private Equity Exchange, the largest private equity event in Europe for CEOs, funds, and LPs. Restructuring, regulation trends in restructuring and practice evolutions.
Usually I speak about restructuring, meaning reorganization of businesses entailing job losses or employment, affecting employment. But I still think that it might be interesting for you to have a broad picture of what Europe, the European Commission and the European Union in general, does to tackle this issue. I was going to say problem, but I prefer to say issue, of corporate restructuring and the employment and social consequences resulting from it. So I'm not going to speak about private equity, about regulation on private equity, even if we all know that there is something being prepared by the European Commission on that, upon the request of some of our leaders, President Sarkozy, Chancellor Merkel, Gordon Brown, and so on, at least in relation to some form of, so to say, private investment when it comes from foreign states, what so-called sovereign funds. There are other colleagues within the Commission dealing with this issue of regulating this type of investments in our internal market and ECFIN departments, but I think that even them would not be prepared to discuss the content of those regulations with you at such an early stage. So let me, before addressing the issue of restructuring and the employment consequences of restructuring, let me tell you from the start that we don't believe in a too quick assumption that private equity is bad for employment. There are many people say it, trying to oppose the short-term vision of private equity investment to long-term sustainability of companies and employment. We don't share that view. We even think that private equity may be at least part of the solution for a big problem we'll have in Europe in some years' time, from 2010 onwards. You know that due to demographic trends, lots of people owning individual or family businesses will retire. Our calculations are that we'll have 700,000 small and medium-sized companies in that situation per year from 2010 onwards. And of course, there is a risk of these businesses going, terminating if there is no transfer of that activity to other, to management. And private equity may be still, will certainly be part of the solution to that. So what I'm going to tell you very briefly is what we in Europe do about corporate restructuring as a whole. And let me tell you that we don't have competence with Commission, the European Commission, to address individual cases of restructuring, except when there is, in a particular case, a breach of community law. If another directive is violated, is breached during a proceeding, we have to intervene, of course. Or if the restructuring, the particular case of restructuring concerns competition law. If it is a merger and acquisition, and above certain threshold, the Commission has to authorize it. But except in this, apart from these cases, we don't intervene in specific cases of restructuring. But we follow them. We follow them because we have many policies which address many different aspects of restructuring. And we don't feel it as, even when there are negative employment consequences, we don't feel that restructuring is a bad thing. It is inevitable, it is necessary for the reorganizations of businesses and for, in many cases, for increasing competitiveness. What I think is that this is a very complex phenomenon, restructuring. And as globalization progresses, it is becoming more and more complex. But of course, in the center, you have always a decision, a management decision. Whatever is the factors triggering that decision. We all know today that major triggering factor for restructuring is liberalization of trade, what we call globalization. It's the fact that we are opening up our economies, and we have, for instance, the arrival of massive imports in some sectors from China, India, and so on. Innovation is a second major source of restructuring, forcing business to adapt very quickly, and so on. And restructuring can take many different forms: internal reorganization, closure of a company, insolvency, mergers and acquisitions, externalization, delocation, etc. In all cases, you have more or less the same actors: management, workers' representatives within the company. These are fundamental actors of the event. And then external actors, social partners, trade unions, organizations, employers and organizations in many countries. I'm speaking about the whole European Union. Public authorities, even if they don't intervene directly to prevent a given restructuring, they are always attentive to what is happening and supporting, in some cases, some of the actors. Public authorities, then at the national, regional or local level. And then you have different effects according to the particular situation. You have, usually, you should have positive effects of restructuring. It should aim at improving the competitiveness of the business and the productivity of workers. It leads to, in many cases, to changes, positive changes in working conditions. For example, when there is an increase in technological processes within companies, that usually means better working conditions because people are more skilled. But sometimes it is followed by negative impacts in terms of job losses. We all know that. In some cases, a restructuring of businesses produces a very heavy and concentrated geographical impact. Just think, for instance, what is happening in the textile sector in some regions of Europe, which are being deserted, or just think about a closure of a major company in a region in France or Spain or elsewhere. And in some cases, we have also sectoral impact. And this is the case of the automobile sector, which we are following now, which faces, all companies face the same kind of challenges. Then we have different regulatory frameworks, regional, national, European, even worldwide, international frameworks in some cases. And we have some different types of measures which we can, and policies which we can mobilize to follow up this restructuring. First of all, there are support measures for instance, for people being made redundant as a result of this decision. We have measures with regard to social protection, allocation de chômage, how do we say it, severance pay, and so on. We have what we call active labor market policies. That means instruments and actions aimed at helping people to re-enter quickly the labor market, training, and so on. And we have sectoral, regional, and industrial policies which also help companies and workers and territories in this kind of situation. So globally, this is a very complex phenomenon which to which we have a positive attitude. It is inevitable. It is favoring Europe. We are gaining a lot from globalization. So what we want is to exploit the full potential of it and to try to alleviate the negative impact. And precisely because the negative impact is very much concentrated in some regions, in some sectors, in some categories of workers. And we have community policies and instruments to deal with it. So if you look at the regulatory framework of a given operation of restructuring, we have, first of all, the EU legislation. In labor law, we have a number of directives. I can speak about them if you so wish afterwards. We have environment law, which will become more and more important in the business environment. We have competition law on mergers and acquisitions, on state aids and so on. Commercial law, we have some European and national, many European and national rules regarding to this. We have stock exchange regulations for public companies, company law, and so on. And this is there is a acquis communautaire extremely important in all these fields, but of course, companies and all the actors are also bound by the same type of regulation at national level. What we do to address this phenomenon within the European Commission is to mobilize a broad range of policies. Employment policy, certainly, but also industrial policy. We are following many industrial and services sectors and trying to develop the factors of competitiveness and putting lots of money on it through innovation, supporting innovation, research and development, and so on. We have competition rules, which are very important at European level because they very much influence the behavior of the actors. We have structural policies, what we call structural funds, 300 billion euros for the period between 2007 and 2013 to help workers and in some cases also companies to deal with the anticipation of change and restructuring. And it is, of course, these are extremely useful instruments in difficult situations. We have trade policy, which is a common European Union competence for some years now. So it is a very important policy. We know that there is a European Union delegation today in China. I'm finishing, trying to negotiate solving some conflicts between the EU and China, and the impact of those negotiations in the European economy will be enormous. And we have, finally, what we call the Lisbon strategy, aimed at increasing the competitiveness factor and increasing the knowledge base of the European economy. And we do all this within the Commission through a task force which regroups many different departments dealing with those policies, amongst which the Employment Directorate General, to which I belong. And I'll stop here. I just gave you a very brief overview of what we do in Europe, and I hope it has been useful for you. Thank you.
Yes, actually, I am Yvon Dréano from Jeantetassociés, and I'd like to give you an outline of some key practical issues regarding the French practice of distressed M&A. And actually, this presentation will be the frame of the next presentation, which will be about a case study regarding a safeguard protection and more particularly concerning an LBO. So first, when looking at distressed M&A, we have to ask a question of the goals which are pursued by the investors, and basically these goals are still about the same. That means that the investor is about to acquire a majority stake in the distressed company's share capital against a price which will be as low as possible, a token payment. Second objective of the investor, that will be the restructuring of the financial situation of the distressed company. And here the objectives will be, in most cases, first to reduce the debt level of the company and to increase the net equity of the distressed company. Preliminary step for the investor, that will be to have a good understanding of the situation of the distressed company. First, the investor will try, obviously, to identify the origin of the difficulties, and because of the very particular context of that type of acquisition, obviously there will be no much time to perform some extensive due diligence. And if industrial investors would still prefer to do some due diligence, some other, particularly financial investors, would even go for the acquisition without performing those extensive due diligence. Second task to identify the situation of the company, that will be to assess the current cash situation of the company, and to establish some forecast based on realistic assumptions. And third, the investor will have to build a realistic and sustainable business plan. A priority, for the investor will be obviously to fund the business while building up the solution for acquiring the distressed company. Here, the purpose of the investor will be to avoid the disruption of the business. That means to avoid the insolvency of the company. And we in France would be in such a situation whenever the company would no longer be able to pay its debts when they fall due. And actually that would be the worst scenario, particularly in terms of image, because it would be the scenario of the insolvency of the distressed companies. So the means for avoiding that, and particularly as long as the investors, does not have a deal with the shareholders, it will not contribute funds for the operational needs of the company. So he has to find some means for it, and among those means, there will be the possibility to obtaining some flexibility on payment terms from the main suppliers or from the main clients. There will also be the possibility of having shareholders injecting some cash into the company, or having the banks and other investors bringing some new money. Actually, the funding of the business while building up the solution has been improved recently in France because of some innovations which were enacted in the 2005 law. And one of the main innovations is the so-called new money lien, the purpose of which is to grant to the new money provider the right to be repaid in priority in case of safeguard proceedings, or in case of insolvency proceedings would be opened against the debtor. So there are a few conditions to satisfy to be able to benefit from that new money lien, which would be first to actually lend some new money, and it would not be the case whenever there would be a consolidation of pre-existing debt, or whenever there would be equity fundings. Second condition, the debtor has to be subject to a conciliation proceedings. And third condition, the new money would have to be part of an arrangement among the debtor and the main creditors, which would ensure the recovery of the distressed company, and which will have to be approved, homologué by the court. Actually, with the passing of time, we were able to realize that that incentive has not been as efficient as we thought it would first. I mean, it would be first, and particularly because it requires that the conciliation plan be approved by the court, and therefore is no longer confidential. And confidentiality is really key for the success of recovery of distressed companies. Still on the subject of the funding of the business, there is another incentive by the law, and which is recent, and actually right now, as a matter of principle, lenders may no longer be held liable as a result of their loan, the so-called soutien abusif, except only in 3 cases, which are the case of fraud, second, the case of involvement of the lender in the management of the debtor's business, and third, the case of security interests, which would be disproportionate to the amount of the loan. So as a matter of principle, now lenders are no longer liable for the loan they would make to distressed companies, except in those 3 cases. Another question is how to deal with creditors. And here we have to make a distinction between out-of-court proceedings and in-court proceedings. In the framework of out-of-court proceedings, that means in France the so-called mandat ad hoc or the conciliation, the creditors are free to consent to rescheduling and or partial waiver of their debts. And it should be underlined that in case of conciliation, the tax and social administrations are now, because it is an innovation resulting from the new safeguard law, so they are now entitled to cancel their debts in case other creditors would do the same. So basically, here's the restriction. That means that creditors have to do the same, result from the threat of the prohibition of state aids, which is provided by EU legislation.
And just could you make a conclusion? And I think it would be very interesting to see the practical case. How does it work? How does it really work?
Yes. So I maybe just wanting to say a few more words about creditors. I will jump to shareholders, because when purchasing a distressed company, it is important to know how to deal with the shareholders. And I would like to finish with some typical issues which are raised by the shareholders in that type of situation. So first, the shares would be, as we said before, transferred for a purchase price which would usually be €1 price, and which would include a price increase in case of recovery of the debtor. So that means that there would be some financial tests to be met, so that the price would be offered to the seller would be increased, or in case of funds investing in distressed companies, the price could be increased when the fund would exit the company. Another issue in that respect is the limitation, if not the exclusion of liability in connection with the potential collapse of the debtor. And here that would raise some legal issues, because the idea would be to enter into a settlement agreement between the receiver and the seller and the purchaser. And so according to the most recent position of the French Supreme Court, it seems that indeed such a settlement agreement would be possible, at least before any court decision would be issued on the liability.
I will give you an example of what happens in reality when we talk about distressed LBOs, when we talk about safeguard proceedings. What is the result of the development of that secondary market? There will be a game. The game is you will have to guess the name because I deleted all names in the presentation, and there will be a game for me, which will be try to avoid pronounce the names. As a matter of fact, I guess many of you have reviewed that case that has been going around all the desks in the past months and years. The company we are talking about has been the object of LBO in 2001. It works in the haircare product market, selling haircare products to mass market and to professional market. It owns renowned trademarks, and it is structured as many LBO groups, many groups having been the subject of LBO, with the holdco and operative companies below. We have two levels of debt, one senior debt on the holdco, of course, and some operational debt on the opcos. The company employs around 500 people, mainly in France, but also in Spain and Italy. And the turnover is globally 130 million euros per year. Operating account positive 2.5 million euros, but net loss in 2006 of 7 million euros, mainly due to the amortization of goodwill for several subsidiaries and trademarks. This is what happens when, in end of 2006, the equity sponsor decides to sell the company. It doesn't find any purchaser because he's willing to sell the company not for a lot of money, but he's putting as a prerequisite that bank debts will be paid globally without efforts being asked to any banks. Whereas all the potential investors have identified that potential target for several years and consider that negotiation should take place with banks also. At the end of the day, the company is sold to the president of the group in March 2007. The result of this situation is that we have several breach of covenants, which means that the debts could be anticipated, several breach of covenants being on ratios that have never been respected from the beginning of the LBO, and second, the transfer of the control of the group hasn't been submitted to the banks before it took place. At that stage, the company is very positive on the outcome of the situation because it has always kept good relations with the bank that financed the LBO in 2001. The banks have always accepted to waive the covenants that have not been respected, so everybody thinks life will go on like that. At this stage, what happens is a US bank decides to purchase some of the debt at a discounted price, but not that much discounted. The idea very clearly is not that they want to be reimbursed of the debt and consider that there is something to be done, but the idea for them is an aggressive takeover either on the OpCo or on the assets themselves. The usual answer to such a situation would be to enter into negotiations through amicable proceedings we know, such as mandat ad hoc or conciliation. In this very specific case, we have been directly to sauvegarde, which is totally unusual. The reason for that is that the tentative of takeover was so aggressive that we realized that there was no way for us to be protected by mandat ad hoc or conciliation. The US bank that had purchased all the debts of the company benefited from pledges on the shares of the OpCo and on the trademarks. So if we entered into amicable negotiations, they still had the possibility to ask for the sale of the assets to their exclusive benefits. And something that is usually not very much known is that the protection offered by conciliation or mandat ad hoc, the protection offered by section 1244 for specialists of the civil code, doesn't prevent any creditors that benefits from pledges to continue executing its pledges. So the only solution we had was to get into sauvegarde. There was several challenges in that. The first thing is we didn't want the OpCo to go into sauvegarde because the OpCo was going quite well. I wouldn't say it's a marvelous company, but the cash flows are positives. And going into bankruptcy at a stage where the company has to renegotiate contracts with mass market distributors would be a nightmare and would break confidence of all its partners. And we had no specific difficulties in the OpCo. The difficulty was really financial difficulties in the OldCo. The second challenge was that we had to prove that we were not in cessation of payment. This was the easiest part. The creditor had notified the anticipation of all the loans for the 18th of May. So it was only a rush for us, end of April, to prepare the complete file for the court, to go to the court and obtain a decision quickly enough to have that decision being rendered before the 18th of May, which means in less than 2 weeks. And in that time, as long as anticipation was due on the 18th of May, on the 14th of May, we were not in cessation of payment, so the court was allowed to open safeguard. The main discussions we had with the court at that stage was is it relevant to open a safeguard proceeding for holding company that doesn't have specific operational activity? And B, do you have any solution? Because the court didn't want to get into something where safeguard would be used as a way for any debtor to avoid paying its creditors and just obtaining delays over the time to pay over its debts. We have been successful in convincing the court, and of course, we thereafter have been successful in finding the proper means to refinance the company. The solution was rendered by the court in October this year, so we had the decision in 5 months, which is quite short. And the plan was very simple. Between May and August, we negotiated a new loan refinancing all the debts of all the group. And the plan was we pay everybody 100% cash, which makes things a lot easier. The idea behind that was that any plan we would have proposed would have faced the opposition of the US creditor that didn't want any plan and that was trying to do a judicial war, fighting against all courts' decisions and clearly stating that what they wanted was to do a plan de cession, to purchase the assets through a liquidation. So that global refinancing was the way to find a solution. What conclusions can we draw from that situation? The first is, in my view, that safeguard is a very efficient tool for the treatment of pure financial crisis. As you have seen, we haven't dealt with any restructuring of the business. That part of the job had been done in the past by the opcos. We only treated with financial problems in the holdco. In that situation, the safeguard proceedings provided us with 5 months, to prepare for a global refinancing of the whole group. And it has been very efficient. The nice thing about that case is that it proves that you can use the safeguard to get protection for a certain amount of time from your creditors, not in order to impose them harsh solutions, but to impose a solution that protects all interests in presence. The creditors have been paid off 100% their debt in anticipation, because the maturity of the original contract was only 2009. So I guess this proves at the same time how efficient the safeguard proceeding can be, and the limitation of that proceedings that does not allow any social restructuring to be taken, and doesn't help very much the operative company to be protected. This is something that has to be kept in mind at the time where our President of la République has announced that a reform of the safeguard law should happen in the next months. And I guess one of the ideas that could be developed is to extend the applicability of the safeguard to opcos through the possibility to operate social restructuring, as it is the case in redressement judiciaire. I don't know whether this is politically acceptable. I'm not very optimistic about that, but I still think this is one of the things that should be worked on.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for the presentation.